Our following guest definitely knows. Bryan Broaddus, of course, 105.3 The Fan, another Odyssey station, and Love of the Star podcast, a draft show. He is a former NFL scout and is just great. Bryan, how you doing?
I'm doing well, gentlemen. Thank you so much for having me on today.
All right, I want to get right to it. A lot of mock drafts have Bijan Robinson falling to the Cowboys in the 20s.
Right.
Is there any way this happens?
Well, it's funny. I was on with, we were doing the Love of the Star the other day, the podcast, as you mentioned, and I was with Brian Baldinger, happened to be on. And, everything that if you follow along what's going on in Philadelphia, their fan base is lining up at 10 to try and grab Bijan Robinson. And then our fan base here in Dallas is like, after the experience of Ezekiel Elliott and paying running backs and all that, I have never seen two fan bases so opposite about how a player. And, I've, as you mentioned, as a former scout, and I have the opportunity to evaluate tape. I have the access to tape. And, I start my journey on this draft, in December 1st, like towards the end of the NFL season. And Bijan Robinson was one of those guys that I watched very early. And, here again in Dallas, and my son goes to school at the University of Texas there in Austin. So he talks about him all the time. And, the evaluation, and, it was always really consistent with him. He's, as I've started to stack my board, I'm well over 200 players. He's the number 3 player on my board.
Wow.
And so, I think that much. Now, people will say, well, hey, Broaddus, you're an old crusty scout. You believe in the running game, all that stuff. I just know that we go through things here in Dallas when we start to talk about, with Dak Prescott. How do you help Dak Prescott? How do you help an offensive line? How do you help a defense? And, and Bijan Robinson is one of those guys that, is, again, when you watch him very early in December, he stacks up against the top players in the country, regardless of the position. And I know people are digging running backs. They're digging running backs in Philadelphia. They're not digging running backs in Dallas. And so I think there's a minefield. If you're the Cowboys and the Cowboys have this ability, and I've worked for Jerry Jones for 14 years, so I understand what, they're going to let the board come to them. Now, they're going to have to walk the minefield of Bijan Robinson at a couple of different spots. And, whether that's Philadelphia at 10, whether that is, the situation in Tampa, Baltimore. They're going to have to walk the field. And I do promise this, guys, though, if he gets to 26, he will be the best player on the Cowboys board. And the Cowboys have shown the last several years with Will McClay, running the draft the way he has, that they're willing to take a CeeDee Lamb, who was the best player. We never thought that CeeDee Lamb was going to get to them at 17, but lo and behold, look what happened. A couple of draft picks went their way, and they got a player in their lap. And, I think it's going to have to fall the same way. But I will be fascinated if, in fact, that he does make it there. I could see Jerry Jones taking him, but I could see people in the room there in Dallas kind of just trying to discuss, okay, do we really want to take, what about this guard do we have? What about this kid from this offensive tackle from Tennessee that we can play guard? What about this tight end Mayer from Notre? Those are the discussions.
It's funny, Bryan, I remember I'm from Philadelphia yelling at my TV when they didn't take Ricky Williams in 1999.
Right.
Turns out they took Donovan McNabb. So Philly fans and running backs in the draft cannot be trusted. Do you think it's possible the NFL has gone too far in lowering running backs in the draft?
Well, that's a great question, because I know the importance of it myself. I've seen how running games affect these games every week, and the ability to be able to, the Cowboys, offensively under Kellen Moore, there was a time like the last couple of seasons where, the first part of the season they are running the ball with just, they're 5, 6, 7 yards a shot. They're doing it with, they figured out how to get Pollard going. They have Zeke is healthy. They're doing the things the right way. And so, yeah, you're kind of sitting there thinking like, okay, this is what it needs to be. But I do feel like because the way the college game, and it's so unusual now, guys, because of what's going on, this might be of all the years that I've done this since 1992, this might be the deepest that I've ever seen a running back class. But here we are, we're getting to a point where these running backs are, not only have to carry the ball, they have to be blitz pickup guys, and they have to be able to catch. And that's what you get with the Bijan Robinson, from Texas. That's what you get from Gibbs at Alabama. You get these guys that have the ability to catch the football. And also, if you're devaluing the running back, I think you're kind of going down the wrong path, because these guys are clearly weapons, in the league. And we've seen, several, but there's people who say, well, you can find them in the 6th round. You can find them in the, 7th round. I don't always buy that, but this might be the one draft where you could actually say, hey, there's a quality back in the 5th round. There's a quality back in the 6th round. So this leads to the people or the fans or everybody's out there who hates running backs. This leads to the discussion is you don't have to take Bijan Robinson. You could take his teammate, Roschon Johnson, in the 3rd round and be just as good.
Talking to Bryan Broaddus, 105.3 The Fan in Dallas, former NFL scout, NFL draft expert. I want to dive into the quarterbacks in a minute, but Bryan, I'm curious, you've been in these meetings with teams. Jalen Carter, Georgia, we know about the talent, but we also know about the character concerns. What do you think the discussions are right now, especially the teams in the top 10 who might want to draft Jalen Carter out of Georgia?
Yeah, I think and you're absolutely right. And I was fortunate enough, myself and Mike Lombardi ran a draft in Philadelphia in '98 where we drafted Trey Thomas in the 1st round with the 11th overall pick. And there was a lot of questions about Trey at Florida State and the kind of people he was hanging out with. Was there marijuana use? And there were just all kinds of things that just kind of circling above his head. And, we were trying to kind of figure all that out. We knew we really liked Trey a lot. I mean, Randy Moss was part of that '98 draft, too. We did a lot of work on Randy Moss. Jeff Lurie, the owner, was very much like, listen, guys, I just don't feel comfortable with that. So we went. But that's where you got to do your due diligence. And that's where, a lot of these teams have the ability, the access to whether it's, law enforcement, FBI, private investigators. If I was in the top 10, and the possibility that I was going to see Carter in my lap when I potentially would pick, I would hire a private investigator to go down to Athens, Georgia, and kind of figure all this stuff out. I would have somebody report to me, trail for a week, kind of talk to people, get an idea about the player. We're about to spend millions and millions of dollars. I remember Jeff Lurie asking me about we really need to spend $25,000. I'm like, Mr. Lurie, we're about to spend millions of dollars on this player, so we need to know about him. And he agreed. He's like, yeah, you're right about that. So I think if you're one of those teams that has the possibility of grabbing Carter, I think you have to have your security people or somebody that you hire in Athens, Georgia, and kind of figuring all this thing out so you don't fly into this thing blind.
Bryan Broaddus here with us. Let's get to the quarterbacks. I was talking with Andrew the other day, and I said that 4 quarterbacks are to go right off the board to start this draft with the Cardinals, making a trade with the Raiders to allow that to happen. How many quarterbacks do you think we could see go in the top 10?
Yeah, I think a lot of it depends on the Richardson thing, and where does Will Levis have it? I'm trying to warn Cowboy fans. I'm like, listen, you don't want the Commanders to get a quarterback. I think the Commanders are one of those teams that if they do figure out the quarterback spot, that we're going to be kind of all going, oh, okay, well, the division just got a little bit tougher with Phil. And, the division was good last year, but I think that the interesting one is where does Richardson and where does Levis go? I personally have it. I have it Alabama, Ohio State, Kentucky, and then Florida. That's how I would have my quarterbacks ranked there. So, Young, Stroud, and then Levis, and then Richardson. I do not have a first-round grade on Richardson myself. And so 3 quarterbacks in the first. And the guy that I think that people – I don't think they're sleeping on him, but – the Hendon Hooker player kid at Tennessee, I think is one of those guys, if he wasn't injured.
He'd be a first-round pick.
I think we'd be talking about him in all this mix right now. And, I know if you really want to make people mad in Dallas, bring up the fact that you would draft Hendon Hooker in the 2nd round and see what happens there, and then oh, you Dak hater. And then the people that hate Dak are like, yeah, Hendon Hooker. I mean, it's such a – you really want to make people mad, and you guys do great radio, so you know about this. You could really motivate fan bases, and you could really piss fan bases off. And to me, Hendon Hooker is one of those guys. They always talk about players that are going to get drafted higher than we think. I think Hendon Hooker is one of those guys. I really. We had a deal on the draft show where we did a mock draft like 3 weeks ago, and a guy I worked with, Zach Wolchuk, at Minnesota, he picked Hendon Hooker in the first round. And then from that point on, I started seeing all these Daniel Jeremiahs and Bucky Brooks, and everybody's mock draft had Hendon Hooker being picked in the first round. And so I looked at Zach and said, hey, congratulations on being the trendsetter. And I'm like, he goes, am I wrong? Am I wrong about this? And I'm like, no, you're not. So, yeah, these quarterbacks, it's a unique draft for a couple of ways. You got to figure out these quarterbacks, but you all got to also figure out these short wide receivers. I've never been a part of a draft with more short wide receivers that are 5'9", 5'8", 180 pounds, 175 pounds. This is my old boss Ron Wolf used to say this. He goes, these cats better walk on water if you're going to draft somebody with that kind of size. So it's a unique draft in a lot of different ways.
That's funny, Brian. I have heard a couple of people say that the wide receivers might go lower this year than they've gone in recent years. Yeah. Is it possible we only see one or maybe two wide receivers in the first round?
No, absolutely. It depends on, who you like. With Smith and Jigba is a fascinating study. But the Smith and Jigba, like if you watch the Utah Rose Bowl game, you would draft Smith and Jigba in the top 3 the way he played that game. I know Harrison had a great game as well. But then here's Smith and Jigba. He doesn't, he's dealing with a hamstring injury. You're kind of thinking, whoa, what's going on here kind of stuff. But him, Addison, Johnston, who's in our backyard here at TCU, I mean, I've heard so many different combinations. Hyatt from Tennessee, is he a first-round guy? Whoa, he weighs 175 pounds? You're like, it's just a really, really, there's no Jeffersons, there's no Chases, there's no CeeDee Lambs, there's no, we've had a run here the last several years where there have been those quality wide receivers, and you're just going, okay, boom, take that guy, and and you kind of have an idea. This is a group where, like I was telling you guys, I'm evaluating, I'm putting the Flowers and, all these guys, these shorter downs from North Carolina. You put them all kind of in one round, and you're sitting there, Bill Parcells used to say, damn, Broaddus, you got them stacked in there like club sandwiches. And I'm like, Coach, I'm trying to figure out, who they are. You're kind of you're putting them all in the same spot, and you're just, okay, let me see what traits I can do to kind of separate these guys. I think that's what teams are going through right now, and it might be a little bit of a problem.
Real quickly, Brian, before we let you run, pretend I'm Parcells, and I go to you and ask you why you don't have a first-round grade on Anthony Richardson. What's your answer?
I tell you what, the thing that the first round, I know Parcells is going to fall in love with him because of his size. That Parcells is super, super big on that, how his quarterback looks. So Anthony Richardson is going to fit his eye. He's going to, but there are games where you watch him throw, and he's had just as many games where he hasn't had a tremendous amount of passing yards. In a league, in a college system where everybody's throwing the football, there are games where you watch and he's struggling throwing the football. And there's other games where you're absolutely just like floored. And scouts are always taught, hey, if you've seen it one time, you'll see it again. I just don't know. Maybe when you start to, and I always hate this when they say, oh, the ceiling and the floor, that kind of crap, because I never understand it very well. But it might be because I'm Louisiana educated too, but I don't mean to offend anybody, but that's the truth.
I'm with you. I went to Temple. I don't get it either.
There you go. So to me, the thing about it is with Richardson, I just don't see it enough. And that's the thing. Now, you watch Young play, and I mean, it's like even the Heisman year and last year, maybe Alabama didn't have one of their best teams last year, and they're struggling in these games, and he's bringing them back. He's calm in the pocket. He's moving. You look what Stroud did against Georgia, the eventual national champion. You're like, okay, I get it. I see it. I mean, I think at quarterback, especially that high, you have to be able just to see it down after down after down. One of the best evaluators I've ever been with quarterbacks was Sean Payton. Sean Payton could evaluate quarterbacks. He was with us in Philly. I was with him in Dallas. I mean, if you gave Sean the list of quarterbacks, I bet you his board in Denver is going to be right with these quarterbacks. But the thing with Richardson, man, I'm like, Coach, I think it's really, really inconsistent with him. And I think that maybe until he gets it, we're going to deal with a lot of those inconsistencies in his game as well.
Bryan, can't tell you how much we appreciate you taking the time during this very busy season, and we look forward to talking again, maybe closer to the season. Cowboys,
absolutely.
Our audience loves the Cowboys. You know that.
Absolutely. You guys do a hell of a job. And again, thanks again for having me on. And anytime you want to visit, I'm available.
Okay. Thanks, Bryan.